Imagine being so wealthy that you go on a religious pilgrimage, nothing more than a trip to say your prayers, and accidentally crash the economies of Egypt, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean simply by being too generous along the way. Imagine being so powerful that European cartographers put you at the center of their maps of the world, even though they had never met you and were working from stories told by traders who had simply seen your caravan pass through a city. Imagine being so consequential that historians are still writing about your road trip 700 years later. Now imagine that most people today have never heard your name. His name was Mansa Musa. And the evidence tells a different story than the one history taught you about who the greatest people who ever lived actually were. To understand Mansa Musa, you first need to understand what Africa was in 1324, not the Africa of European colonial imagination. The Africa of 1324 was home to one of the most sophisticated, wealthy, and culturally advanced civilizations on Earth. At its center, controlling more than half of the entire world's gold supply at the Mali Empire, larger than Western Europe, controlling the Saharan trade routes through which gold and salt flowed between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. Timbuktu in 1324 was not a remote outpost. It was one of the most sophisticated cities on Earth, its university housing 25,000 students, its libraries containing nearly 1 million manuscripts. Scholars, merchants, diplomats, and artists filled its streets. This was the world Mansa Musa ruled. He came to the throne in 1312. In the 12 years since, he had expanded the empire, consolidated its gold trade, and accumulated wealth at a pace the medieval world had never seen. The most commonly cited modern estimate puts his net worth at approximately $400 billion, but that number almost certainly underestimates it. Mansa Musa did not just have wealth. He controlled the source of wealth. He sat atop the gold mines that supplied the entire medieval world. He was not rich the way a modern billionaire is rich. He was rich the way a force of nature is powerful, directly, permanently, without limit. And in 1324, this man, this emperor, this living economic phenomenon, decided to go on a trip. The trip was a Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim with the means to make it is expected to complete at least once. Mansa Musa had the means. He took with him 60,000 people, an entire medieval city, walking across the Sahara. His personal retinue included 12,000 enslaved people, dressed in brocade and Persian silk. 500 servants walked ahead, carrying golden staffs each weighing 2 kilograms. 100 camels each carried between 100 and 300 pounds of pure gold dust. The procession stretched so far into the desert that people at the front could not see the people at the back. But here is something most accounts of this story leave out entirely. Mansa Musa was not supposed to be emperor. The man who held the throne before him was Abu Bakr II, a visionary, a ruler consumed by one question: what lies on the other side of the ocean? In 1311, he assembled the largest fleet the West African world had ever seen, 2,000 boats, provisioned for a voyage of unknown length. He appointed Mansa Musa as his deputy, gave him authority over the empire, and sailed west into the Atlantic Ocean. He was never seen again. Not one boat returned. Abu Bakr II sailed into the horizon and disappeared as completely as if the ocean had swallowed him whole. And Mansa Musa, the deputy, the stand-in, the man left behind, became the most powerful person on earth. Hold that thought. It becomes important at the very end of this story. The caravan reached Egypt in July 1324. Musa made his camp near the pyramids of Giza, 3 days there, his retinue making the ancient wonders look, for once, like an appropriate backdrop. Cairo at this time was a city of nearly 1 million people, the intellectual and commercial capital of the Islamic world. Musa declined to meet with the Sultan. This was a spiritual journey, not a diplomatic one. He was going to Mecca to pray. What happened in Cairo was not planned, not calculated, not a strategy. It was just Mansa Musa being Mansa Musa. He gave gold to government officials, to scholars, to the poor, to merchants, traders, craftsmen, to anyone who crossed his path. He paid 5 times the asking price for everything his caravan needed. He bought souvenirs at whatever price the seller named, because what was a few gold coins to a man who owned the world's gold mines? The Egyptian historian Al-Umari recorded this 12 years later. The people of Cairo earned incalculable sums from him. There was no person who did not receive a sum of gold from him. So much gold was current in Cairo that it ruined the value of money. If you're new here, welcome to the Histowise. This channel explores the hidden side of history, the stories that rarely make it into textbooks. If that's your kind of content, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss the next deep dive. Now let's continue. What Mansa Musa did not understand was that gold is not just a beautiful metal. Gold is money, and money only has value when it is scarce. In one afternoon in Cairo, he distributed more gold into the Egyptian economy than the country had seen in years. Supply flooded the market. Price collapsed. The value of gold in Cairo fell by between 10 and 25%, almost overnight. The effects spread across the entire Middle East and Mediterranean. The disruption was so severe that 12 years later, when Al-Umari visited Cairo, residents were still calculating the damage, still trying to understand how one man's generosity had broken their economy for over a decade, not through invasion, not through war, through a tourist with too much money and too generous a heart. And now the part of this story that almost nobody tells. By the time the caravan was ready to continue to Mecca, something extraordinary had happened to the finances of the richest man in history. He had run out of money. The richest human being who ever lived. The man who had just crashed the Egyptian economy with his generosity had given away so much in Cairo that he did not have enough left to fund the return journey home. Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, King of Kings, Lord of the Mines of Wangara, had to ask someone for a loan he borrowed from Egyptian merchants, at interest. The richest man in history, carrying an empire's worth of gold on 100 camels, took out a loan to cover his immediate expenses because he had given away more than he could afford in a city he was passing through on the way to say his prayers. This is not a metaphor. This actually happened. The Hajj itself was everything Musa had hoped. He arrived in Mecca as the most celebrated figure in the Islamic world. He prayed at the Kaaba. He completed the pilgrimage that had driven him across the Sahara. He spent time in Mecca and Medina, giving away 20,000 gold pieces in each city, because apparently the lessons of Cairo had not fully landed. And then he turned around and began the long journey home. But on the way home, something remarkable happened. Something that elevates Mansa Musa from a fascinating historical curiosity to something genuinely extraordinary. He tried to fix it. Understanding the economic damage his generosity had caused, Mansa Musa began buying back gold in Egypt on his return journey. Deliberately, strategically, at the inflated prices his original generosity had created, deliberately pulling gold back out of the market to reduce supply and restore value. He is the only person in recorded history to have personally caused a major economic collapse and then personally attempted to reverse it by buying back the asset he had flooded the market with. It did not fully work. The damage was too deep. 12 years later, Cairo's gold market was still recovering. But the attempt tells us something important about who Mansa Musa was. He was not careless with his power. He was simply operating at a scale the world had no framework to contain. He returned transformed. He brought back the finest Islamic architects of the age and commissioned an extraordinary building program: mosques, libraries, universities. Under his patronage, Timbuktu became what Florence would later become for Renaissance Europe, the intellectual capital of its world. His fame spread so far that by 1375, nearly 40 years after his death, European cartographers were depicting him at the center of their maps of the world. The Catalan atlas shows a figure on a throne at the heart of Africa, wearing a crown of gold, holding a gold nugget. The caption identifies him as Lord Musa, the richest and most noble king in all the land. The Europeans who drew that map had never met him, never visited Mali. They were working from stories told by traders who had simply seen his caravan pass through Egypt. His wealth was so extraordinary that one trip through Cairo had made him famous on a continent he had never visited. Mansa Musa died in 1337. 25 years on the throne. An empire at its absolute peak. An intellectual legacy that would outlast everything else he built by centuries. His sons could not hold what he had built. The empire fragmented within a generation. By the 15th century, the civilization that had been the wealthiest in the world was gone. And here is where both threads of this story resolve. Remember Abu Bakr II, the emperor who sailed into the Atlantic in 1311 and was never seen again. The man whose disappearance accidentally created the richest emperor in history. Where did he go? Some historians argue he sailed too far and was lost to storms. Others argue something far more extraordinary, that Abu Bakr II may have reached the Americas, more than 180 years before Christopher Columbus. The evidence is fragmentary and contested. But there are linguistic connections between certain West African languages and some pre-Columbian American cultures. There are oral traditions in indigenous American communities speaking of visitors who arrived from the East before the Europeans. There are medieval West African accounts describing Abu Bakr's absolute certainty that land lay to the west. We may never know. The ocean kept its secret as completely as it kept the fleet. But here is what we do know. If Abu Bakr II had stayed on his throne, if he had chosen the crown over the horizon, Mansa Musa would never have become emperor. The most powerful and wealthy man in human history only existed because another man chose the unknown over everything he already had. The loan was repaid. Musa returned to Mali and settled his debts with the Egyptian merchants who had lent money to the richest man in history. But the attempt to buy back gold did not repair the Cairo economy. The damage lasted 12 years. 12 years of disruption caused not by war, not by greed, not by disaster, but by one man's extraordinary generosity on a religious pilgrimage. Here is what Mansa Musa's story tells us about the world we live in today. When a single individual controls enough of any resource, their ordinary decisions become extraordinary events for everyone else. The scale of the power is the problem, not the intention behind it. Mansa Musa did not crash the Egyptian economy because he was cruel or reckless. He crashed it because he was generous, because the gap between his resources and everyone else's was so vast that his charity became their catastrophe. That gap between the person who has everything and the systems that have to absorb what they do with it has not gone anywhere. The Catalan atlas shows him exactly as he was at the center of the world, the richest, the most powerful, the most generous, the most consequential tourist in the history of economics. And yet ask 100 people to name the richest person who ever lived. Almost none of them will say his name. History has a habit of remembering the people who took things. It is less reliable about remembering the people who gave everything away.